You are now listening to Musings Behind the Creative. What's your passion? Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Musings Behind the Creative. I'm your host Renata Dixon-Rawsu, and we have Alastair Blyth back with us again. And we had a great interview, I think a couple of weeks ago.
It was,
yeah.
Yes it was.
Talking about your architectural experience and your journey. And today's episode is sort of based off of a conversation that we were having in the background as to what is the future of the architectural profession and the architect moving forward, assuming that, well, because the landscape is actually changing because of laws and regulations and stuff like that.
Well, yes, landscape is changing also because our context is changing. And so, yes, the regulatory environment is changing, and for us as academics, the most obvious change is the ARB's education reform, which means that we're having to think about the courses that we're providing, and in a way, it sort of relates to itself how perhaps the ARB sees architecture as a profession, as a practice, evolving, and so I think the first thing to say about that is that while the Architects Registration Board, ARB, is changing the way it looks at the architecture education. Our professional body, which is the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, at the moment is keeping with its older Part 1, 2 and 3 system.
And just for context, when was the Part 1, 2 and 3 system established?
It was really established in the 1960s, early 60s, after the Oxford Conference, which was actually in 1958. But that essentially is where it sort of started. And I think I've probably said before, a lot of the discussion there was rooted in conversations decades before that, really. So Part 1, 2 and 3, RIBA Part 1, 2 and 3, represented the undergraduate, followed by a period of experience in practice, followed by a postgraduate degree or diploma, followed by another period in practice, gaining more experience before people took their Part 3 exam, which essentially was the oral exam, after which successful candidates, as they called them lovingly, students or others, those who were successful could then register, join the register, and enabled them to call themselves an architect. The title is a protected title by legislation, and they would then be able to join the RIBA, or apply to join the RIBA technically, as chartered
architects
members.
Yeah.
So that then meant if you were or are a member of the RIBA as a chartered member, you could call yourself a chartered architect. So that was the routine. A few years ago, the ARB, having been looking at education for some time, decided that it didn't want to continue accrediting the education of the architectural courses in the same way that it had been, because schools of architecture would get their Part 1 undergraduate course, Part 2 their postgraduate course, and Part 3, which was also a postgraduate course, but it was basically a registration course. Both validated by the RIBA and accredited
by the ARB.
The ARB used this term prescribed, but that doesn't feel right actually. But they've done away with that term. They're now talking accreditation.
Okay.
So the ARB decided it wanted to move away from prescribing or accrediting the Part 1 and just focus on effectively the postgraduate.
Right, so undergraduate will no longer be the equivalent of the Part 1?
Well, the undergraduate, so far as the RIBA is concerned, yes, it will.
Okay.
Because the RIBA isn't changing it. So we run a BA Architecture here, we also run a BSc Architecture Environmental Design, both of which are Part 1 courses. They will continue to be validated by the RIBA, so they will be RIBA validated courses. The ARB is moving away from that and saying, okay, we're not worried about what happens at undergraduate level. We're going to really accredit it from the postgraduate level.
Right, okay.
So the idea behind that is partly because they want to see more inclusion, enable people to more people from a wider background to come into architecture. They're leaving it to the schools of architecture or those providing what we call the Part 2 courses at the moment, but will be the postgraduate courses that the ARB is accrediting. Really to decide who to take on, who's done an undergraduate degree somewhere perhaps, but they're not going to worry about whether they've done an ARB accredited undergraduate degree.
Okay.
So the ARB has also said that they want to see more integrated courses. They've not necessarily been entirely clear what they meant about that. Some people have taken integrated masters to be undergraduate plus postgraduate, so you do the first 3 years as an undergraduate degree and do another year or so to get a postgraduate degree. In other words, the same course just carries on for 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Others have taken that to mean the integrated masters to mean the Part 2 and 3. So you basically, after 2 or 3, after doing 2 or 3 years, you basically get the full recognition, because the ARB have also said that they're going to, you have the academic outcomes and you have the practice outcomes.
Right.
And so they're measuring on these two different outcomes. So technically, yes, you could, if you met all the competency outcomes, as they call them, after doing a postgraduate qualification, you have to have a way of demonstrating that students have met those. Yes, the person would then be able to register to become an architect. The uncertainty amongst all of this is where the RIBA sits in terms of what happens if someone who has done an undergraduate degree that is not validated by the RIBA, and it could be a BA, say, in interior architecture, which might not have been validated, but has done most of the sort of stuff that
competency requirements.
Most of the competency requirements that would, or at least contributes to them, that any other undergraduate architecture course might have done. So what does the RIBA say? Someone goes into a part, what we know as the part 2, finishes the whole of the course, is able to register as an architect with the ARB.
Sorry to interrupt. Is this before or after the 2 years work in practice, or how does that now?
Well, okay, I'll come on to the practical experience. All I was going to say was that, there's a question mark about, well, if someone's able to register but they haven't done an RIBA validated part 1, what's the RIBA going to be saying about this? Are they not able to join the RIBA, or can they, or do they have to do an RIBA additional exam in order to join it, or what is it? We don't know. Practical experience has been a particular issue with all of this, because the regime has been conventionally that in order to do the final oral part 3 exam, which is what everybody's been doing who completes that journey to registration, someone has to have 24 months of logged experience. So this has meant that people have to record their experience, reflect on it, and be able to present it at the time of the oral exam. There have been some real questions about having a time limit on this experience, not least because it's obviously been seen as a minimum, which is understandable. But it's only experience. It's not necessarily particular kinds of experience.
Right.
That's even though we try to make sure students get where we can get a varied experience, it's actually not down to the schools of architecture.
No.
It's down to the practices. So all the student candidate has to do is to be able to present 24-month logged experience. Now, what the ARB have also said, and they've just had a professional practice experience commission report on this, is to essentially drop the minimum requirements. And so it's just going to come down to essentially the competencies that you're measured on. So they should have experience, but because actually a lot of the competencies you really can't meet those without some experience. In some ways, actually, I think the minimum two years, maybe I wouldn't worry too much about losing the minimum at the moment. Although I must admit, I think we have to see how it plays out. Partly because it's about quality of experience.
Of course.
Because the problem has been with some, not everybody, often those in smaller practices get a more varied range of experience simply because they're doing smaller projects with only a few other people in the practice, and they just get involved in lots of things. Sometimes, often, those working in very large practices find it harder to get that range of experience because their projects are much bigger. They don't get moved from a project that's at an early stage or to one that then out to where they're about to apply for planning consent, for example, so they don't necessarily, or then move on to one that's on site. They just don't necessarily
They have to request that.
And that depends on how, their practice mentor and their organisation of the practice sort of manages these things. So it's not so easy for those in larger practices. So the big problem has been that for some, the experience they get is very one-dimensional. And so they don't necessarily see all the stages. Having said that, they are exposed to obviously some of the workings of practice, and I think our advice, my advice certainly to people, is to always look over the sort of garden fence in the office, find out what others are doing, because it's something you can kind of use to your advantage. So it is about quality of experience. We find here with our students, our Part 3 students, the average post Part 2, both the experience, they go average 3 or 4 years before they do their Part 3 exam. And that some do it with just 1, some do it with 11 years. But so not everybody is going to suddenly decide to do their final exam
2 years after they finish their work
or
in
less,
practice.
because that's the other question it raises for us all, for schools, is that the convention has been, or the normal routine has been, that you do the first 1 year of professional practice experience after you've done your undergraduate degree. And actually that is a good time to start getting some experience, because it does two things. I think it allows you space to reflect on what you have learned and actually start applying some of that stuff. And also it enables you to, obviously earn some money if you're particularly, with people racking up significant debt now. But and I think it does contribute in many ways to one sort of maturing as you move into your postgraduate. I certainly remember it, working like that. So, and then the second year, if you like, of practical experience would be after you've done your postgraduate degree. And we're seeing, I think, a push for people to move from undergraduate straight into postgraduate. So the question is how that plays out. I think the pressures on those coming into the profession, particularly those who've accrued a significant amount of debt, is an issue. And we're seeing a lot of students, particularly in the postgraduate degree, also working, so they're full-time students, but also working 1 or 2 days a week in practice, which
in the past has been frowned upon.
It has in the past been frowned upon. The ARB, or the Commission, just reported, and I think the ARB is minded to accept this, has said that, as you say, that was frowned upon, so that didn't count as experience, which in a way is crazy. It's
counterproductive.
Because it is experience. So I think the ARB is going to drop that and say, well, that can count as experience. So there are sort of pros and cons of working in practice at the same time as doing a full-time course in education, and that is simply your time.
You have to be thoroughly organised, and that's me speaking from experience.
Yes.
But also, if you don't see other people doing it, you don't think it's possible. No. And what made me sort of get my mindset in a position that, okay, this is going to be hard, but move for what you want is, I had someone that taught me AutoCAD when I was doing interior architecture and design, and he was doing his Part 2 at Manchester University while working at a firm in Manchester, but he lived in Hackney. So he would drive up to Manchester and do what he needed to do, and then drive back home. And because I would go to his house and then use AutoCAD because I didn't have it on my laptop, I saw him in his routine where he'd come home, he'd sleep. So while he's sleeping, I'm doing my tutorials. Then I'd finish my work to leave his house so he can get onto his work and work till 2, 3 in the morning and literally ration and organise his sleep. And then when I did it at HKS and we were discussing with my line manager how to do it, we agreed on 2 10-hour days. So I understood that maybe that meant I'd have to be in at like 8 o'clock in the morning to finish at 6. And it was organised in such a way that obviously with you working 2 days a week, you can't necessarily work on something that needs a quick turnaround for submission. And if you're not there to carry it on, you know, it kind of impacts the project. So there was this juggling of, okay, you're going to work on short bursts of things that you can do and deliver in the 2 days while doing background work, while sort of developing your skill set. And that's how I ran it. But obviously, being at the RCA and RCA's standard for 7 days a week, it was frowned upon. But I leveraged that I had a studio of architects, which was a lot more than I would get in studio, which would just be my 2 tutors. So I then leveraged talking to the rest of the team on everything, including background research. So I started researching CLT laminates because it was given to me as a reference while I was literally working as a receptionist in HKS, and started working all the technicalities. And it was sort of, I guess you have to have a level of maturity to be able to handle the pressures. You know, what are you going to do? Cry about it that your tutors are not too impressed that you're not turning up and it looks like you're not doing the work. You still have to sort of get that chip off your shoulder and deliver the work and get them to see the confidence in your ability to do that. So I sucked it up, and it wasn't necessarily friendly, but by the end of the year, I actually earned the respect of my peers.
Yes.
In a way that I didn't realise that I would, because I felt that I was missing out. I mean, the RCA building and everything, it's a great environment. And I kind of felt like I missed out on all that cross-pollination because I had 2 days where I had to work in the studio. But by the time we got into 5th year, the guys in the studio that I was in, they came back to me and they said, what you've actually been able to do is we couldn't do it. And what was funny is that this was students that was somewhat international students paying a higher tuition fee, could afford to pay that high tuition fee and still spend 7 days in uni, telling me that what I did, they couldn't do. I wish I had the money that you had to just not have to do this, you know? So I'm not sure how it's going to necessarily integrate with the students, because equally, I guess my question to you is, how, if the onus is not on the ARB to ensure that in studio you're getting the right kind of experience to be able to move forward and charter, how are they going to regulate that with the firms?
Well, that's the big question, because one of the other issues is that the ARB is saying that the learning providers, as
universities, or
we are lovingly called by them, because it's not just universities. Actually, there are others that also provide these courses, so they use a generic term. A response will be responsible really for overseeing the student's sort of whole experience and getting quite coordinating, I think they've phrased it as at the moment, coordinating the student experience part of this whole journey. And of course we have no call on practices other than we have a sort of vicarious relationship with architectural practices because it's through the student. We cannot tell the practices that they must give students X, Y, and Z experience, or at least hope that the practices will actually take any notice if we were to tell them that, because our relationship isn't in that sense contractual.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, that, in terms of both that, but also what happens in the student experience within the School of Architecture, for example, on their course. Well, that is down to us. We aim to enable students to. We've had to recognise for some time now that students do have to generally get some sort of employment while they're with us, because they need to, particularly in London, where they've been racking up huge amounts of student debt, cost of accommodation, if they're living outside London, as some have to simply to be able to afford to live, cost of travel into London. So we've had to kind of manage our courses in a way that enable them to come into the studio. Also try and encourage them to come in as studio groups. So rather than them coming in just to see a tutor or two tutors on a day, to actually for the whole group to be there. I mean, there are quite often you can walk around studios and see the studio groups there. And that's what we try to encourage as well, because the other point about all this is not all the students can necessarily get the same experience in their 1 day or 2 days in practice while they're working.
Yeah.
And not all the students can actually get into a practice to get that part-time job simply in an architectural practice, simply because it may not be there. They may have to get some other kind of job just to make ends meet. So we are trying to always sort of recognise the reality of that. And, that shift over the years from when I would have done my postgraduate course, when mostly, other than possibly evening jobs occasionally, you really didn't have jobs during the daytime with practices or anybody else.
And can I ask, why does it seem that practices tend to frown on part-time hours as an architect?
I don't know, well, I suppose it's continuity. I suppose they like to know that if they've got someone, they've got them for the whole 5 working days of the week, because that's about how they can manage their resource. I suppose it's always trickier if you've got a group of people who are only in 1 or 2 days a week. It's just kind of being able to move them around quickly enough, because if they've got something for someone to do that takes them 4 hours of the 7-hour or 8-hour working day,
that's already half a day gone.
It's half a day gone, and maybe half a day and a bit gone. What are they going to do with the next few hours left? Whereas if they were there for the whole 5 days, they could just move them onto another project, knowing that they can spend the next 3 hours plus the following day working on it. I think it's that. That's probably why. And it's, in a sense, it probably overall is economically less cost efficient for practices to have lots of part-time. Depends how they set themselves up.
But then I'm thinking, with the developments happening and students having to work, I think I'm just thinking outside of the box. Would practices not want to maybe figure out something that would accommodate this ability to have to work while studying in architecture and make that synergistic?
I think some too. I mean, I think there are possibly quite a few practices who do think like that. Do think about what it is who it is that they're employing. If you're employing someone who's at the very early stages of their career, still studying, then I think there are a number of practices who recognise the value of that sort of investment, so will think like that, and are able to make it work well for them. But of course, there are a number of practices who see it just as purely business terms, nothing else.
Yeah.
And so there's the rub, how can we expect the new entrants to the profession, if you like, the early career practitioners, to get experience? It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because practices often want people with experience in order to do certain activities. So, when they're employing someone who's just done an undergraduate degree, they may be saying, well, actually, they can't do a planning application, they can't do this, they can't do that.
Yeah.
Why am I going to bother employing them? And of course, they've probably not got the sort of menial tasks that I would have done when I first went into an architectural practice, having done my undergraduate degree, which was the infamous door schedule.
I was actually terrified of those. I thought, let me not have to do toilets, windows, door schedules.
Where you have to sort of put on this enormous table that was being drawn up how many doors you had, how many hinges on each door, and which doors had what kind of hinges, and what kind of locks, and what kind of door handles, escutcheons, and all the rest of it, which, let's face it, it was boring. But on the other hand, you learned a lot. You had to, because you actually had to go around and actually find out this stuff. You had to be able to read the wretched drawings that nobody could read because, the information was all over the place. You had to actually be able to match it with the specification that was being produced. And all of this, obviously when I was doing it, was without the benefit of computers, but
and
nevertheless,
that is a skill within itself.
You did learn a huge amount, but it was tedious, and so. But of course, now with the advent of technologies, these sort of tasks
can be optimized,
are being done, and in one way, good that they are being done by computers. You don't need someone to sit there and do them. So there are certain kinds of tasks that I think are being done that you would have put the post undergraduate or the post BA BSc student onto, which raises a whole other question, because one might be asking, well, if practices are finding that actually all the tasks that they would have got the new person, the new entrant, the recently graduated student, and put them on just to give them some experience, to get them to know how the practice works, and get them into it slowly, are being much more effectively and efficiently and more quickly done by the technology.
True. But
what are you going to give these people to do?
And this is the thing, like, for instance, on Revit, the process of getting the building information, modelling information into it and then tracking it, it's an administrative process or computer programming workflow that you need to learn within that. And when you are in, for instance, undergrad or in uni designing that, you don't necessarily get to the point that you specify okay, this is a curtain wall system, we're going to need these types of frames from here, there, and then input that in. Those are the parts that you have to learn in practice, that you're not going to get an opportunity to do unless the university or the practice partners with the university to do sort of like live project stuff, which would then open that out a bit more. But for me, when I thought that I would just be given door schedules without context, I didn't like that. It just felt almost like, okay, it's just doors. You're calculating how many doors, then somebody else is going to tell you what doors they are, then you're going to input them in. But when I was working on the Credit Karma Leeds office, what I enjoyed was understanding design concept, understanding the floor plan process, and then understanding how everything fit together. So we had a meeting room that we wanted the doors to open up and fold, and just me going in and searching at which practices or which design companies create these foldable doors, and then you start getting into the technicality of it. That's where I started enjoying it. And then what is it? I think it's is it the specification application, the MBS licenses, yes. And then I saw how that goes through the MBS application, which is a separate application, which is not something that you're going to understand unless you're doing MBS specifications. And so I was open to that, and that was more interesting for me. But I think the reality of it is, in a business, because architecture is a business when you have to deliver a product, the time and the workflow and the billings versus how to translate that to make sure that everybody in the firm gets enough experience and practicality time versus what your clients want is a juggling.
It is. Yeah. Yes, it is. And I think practices will need to be possibly creative in what they're able of thinking about what they can give those who've never had much experience or haven't had any experience in practice before to do, because they do, there is a fear that actually, it'll be those who've finished their postgraduate qualification will end up being given the more, such as they exist, menial tasks to do. So what are they going to give? Because there aren't so many of those sort of menial tasks around. And I say menial, not just basic tasks. So I think there's and it will come out in the wash, I hope. But it picks up another point, which is the context of architectural practice is changing very rapidly because technology is obviously, having a huge impact, and it's opening up a lot of opportunities. And I think, we're certainly thinking about what is it we are educating would-be architects to be doing in the future. And it's not just or necessarily that we're sort of educating the first-year architects for jobs that don't yet exist when they've completed their training. That will possibly be the case. I mean, I think, change is so rapid and acceleration of change is so rapid that there are things that we can't predict. Yeah. But also the way of doing jobs that do exist will change. So we have to think, and it goes back to your point there, about, the integration of Revit or whatever with specification, with, putting all these bits together, how all that is done. So, there is that. I think, those of us who've been around for a bit probably do recognise the value of the physical interaction with people. So architects will have a significant role to play. I think maybe in some ways slightly different from what it has been, but certainly in terms of working with clients, working with inhabitants of buildings and users and all sorts of people, because actually the one thing at the moment that technology cannot replace is this physical interaction and how we relate to each other and how we understand. People. We are physical beings after all. So I think that does open up all sorts of opportunities for people, and the skills that we teach and people learn, students learn, are really very applicable in a wide range of settings. Obviously, there are the technical skills, but cross-transferable, but actually, I don't like this term soft skills, because actually I think they're essential skills, that we talk about, ways of collaboration, because actually creating an environment is a collaborative exercise. And it's very, very important that it's kind of properly integrated across all sorts of systems. So I think, we are sort of providing a framework within which those who leave here hopefully can build on and use to develop. What I'm looking to do, and I'm setting up a project now to do, is to explore what, through a whole scenario-based sort of exercise, of what the future of practice might be like, and how we might understand the direction of it. And what's really interested me about scenario planning, if you like, is in scenario investigations, is I suppose is this idea that you can identify, you kind of create, build a sort of picture of 4 or 5, and we used to do this at the OECD where I worked, of different possible futures, different possible contexts actually, and some of them might be extreme, but you actually just sort of test, well, what would it be like to work in this kind of world or that kind of world, and how does that change, what we need to understand and be able to do as people, whether we're architectural practitioners or anybody else for that matter. And I suppose one of the things that kind of always intrigued me was an exercise done by, I think it was the Rand Corporation for Shell, back in the very early, late 60s, very early 70s, when they were doing scenario planning for Shell. And it was before the Middle East oil crises, various sorts, and before Saudi nationalised its oil production. And it gave Shell, I think it was Shell, a real insight into what it would need to do in terms of its refining capacity. And essentially, what they began to understand was, well, we might know that one of these, the extreme scenario, might actually come to fruition, come to pass, because we'll be able to read some of the political flags.
Of course, yeah.
Which they did. And so they developed their refining capacity elsewhere. Outside the Middle East, they built a whole load of big oil tankers. And so when we had the Middle East oil crisis, they had a head start.
Of course.
And that's always kind of intrigued me, that you can
future-proof.
Sort of begin to future-proof. I mean, it's sort of, whether you can entirely prevent the negative sides of all these futures, but you can certainly begin to you can certainly get one step ahead of it and think about it. I mean, as I've said, I think our issue at the moment is it's change is accelerating. I mean, it seems to me that technologies are developing so fast that
Completely.
we talk about large language models a year ago, and they're quite a different place today. We talk about AI as something that is, well, it's probably something that's quite different from when you were talking about it last week or when we were mentioning it 2 weeks ago. I mean, it's extraordinary, the pace of change. But you know what? These things happen, and yes, these sort of technology changes affect people's jobs because actually some jobs disappear, but always new kinds of jobs develop. The question is the
prompt
pace,
engineering,
the rate of change. So, and our ability to respond to that change. Maybe during the Industrial Revolution, when you saw this, it's a good example of, this. The rate of change was actually slightly slower.
Of course.
So I suppose people managed to kind of catch up with it. Even though it had significant impacts. I don't know. I mean, and of course, we've got other global pressures, of course, economies, migration, etc.
But then equally, I think, especially when I was at HKS, it was 2016, 2017, they were already looking at how to become resilient as a business. And I think I chose to be involved in those conversations because I had an interest of understanding how architecture works as a business, not just as providing a solution or you're doing drawings. But what I came to also understand is that, for instance, now in the world of AI, when we're now scenario modeling these possible futures, with AI now we can actually create, metaverse used to be something that was in the air maybe about 2 years ago. Now you can create what that metaverse actually looks like with programmable people, with the large language models that we are using. And when you were talking about these scenarios, I literally saw it in my head of we could literally prompt engineer what these studios would look like. What would the materialities look like? What would the work flexibility look like? What's the idea of your desk space plus versus a group seating area, and how all of that interacts, as opposed to just drawing it or writing it. You can literally experience it. You
can actually set it up with a VR and actually experience it, and that is being done. And it's kind of slightly frightening, really. Although, you talk about creating programmable people, there are those who would say, well, a lot of our people are already programmed, and in a sense they are. If you look at the marketing tactics and the idea of what marketing is, and then you understand the psychology of it, So, the virtual reality, again, is something that's developing at a huge, very fast pace, and how you give someone a version of the experience. And it is a version of the experience. Because ultimately, it seems to me that actually, we don't experience something until we experience it. So, in other words, we create a VR version of this wonderful environment that we are all designing together. And you sort of think, okay, well, now we build it. The big question is whether what actually happens in that real environment that we've now, not the virtual reality version, bears any resemblance to the virtual reality version. Experience, and this is the big thing, actually it's experience that matters. What is it people are going to experience? And, there is this kind of feeling people want experience now, which is all this sort of, I suppose, people are looking for the quick fix, quick hit experience all the time.
Dopamine nation.
The dopamine nation, yes. And so, it's easy to sort of, is it easy? And maybe it is. I would say, in the VR, if you're trying to sort of sell your design or concept to a client, you're going to rack up the dopamine in this wonderful VR world you've created, only to find it in reality when you build it.
The product doesn't give you the same hits.
The physical reality. So you may as well stay in this sort of VR land. Why bother with the real building? Just give everybody a headset and just do it so we're all walking around a bit.
Well, like surrogates.
Well, in this sort of land that doesn't actually really exist because it only exists in our minds, which sort of will take us all sorts of down all sorts of routes of metaphysics and what have you. So there is all that. So how it will happen over the next 10, 15 years, it's going to be fascinating, I think.
I feel that, as you said, it feels like the universities are going to be, the educational providers are going to be under learning providers are going to be under some sort of pressure, because what skill sets can you give students now that not necessarily guarantee, well, to an extent that you can guarantee that is a skill set that's going to be viable or valuable in the next 3 to 5?
Yeah, absolutely. All of us, over the next 10, 20, 30 years, need to be able to work together. We need to be able to relate to each other. We need to be able to interact with each other. We need to be able to talk with each other, communicate with each other. We need to be able to recognize the other person's emotional position, where they are. So it's basically about people. It's people, stupid. That's it. And yes, obviously, in a architecture design school, we teach people about obviously space and architecture and so on, how people interact with them and so on and so forth. And we've got a school of fashion, and you do things around fashion. We've got a film and television, we do things around film and art and all the rest of it. So, all these sort of different creative enterprises are built out of these things, of course. But nevertheless, it's all about the people.
Yeah.
And that's the core of all of this. Because if people don't come out being able to relate to others, then they will potentially get left out of the loop, I think. Because, that's, as I say, the fundamental thing that will continue to exist. And so, the way we design and build buildings, I mean, of course you can 3D print a building, we all know that. So, a whole load of people knocking bits of buildings together, screwing in screws and using bricks and so on. That you don't have to have. I mean, I'm not saying we would want to do away with the craft skills. And actually, because there's a whole part of our environment that we need to regenerate.
We do, because the skill sets are dying,
Well, not just because the skill sets are dying, but actually because in terms of regeneration, you don't want to just build new things all the time. You want to find creative new ways of using what we've already got. And, because there are, but there are certain skills, like, I mean, we've seen over the recent years, an increase in stonemasonry.
And beautiful stuff.
And, I remember when I was young, that was seen as a sort of dying art. dying
Really?
craft. Well, it was because people went into stonemasonry because, you had a few, and obviously you needed a few because you know a few old churches and cathedrals mostly. But now you're seeing it really come back, and it is actually around conservation, mostly regeneration. But think about France and Notre Dame, Paris. Within pretty near 5 years, they rebuilt
The whole thing.
the whole 12th century cathedral,
And
lock,
you
stock,
need
and barrel.
and you need the expertise for that.
And they were able to source the expertise globally, and quite a lot came from the UK and so on. But nevertheless, that's a bit of an extreme example. But yeah, I mean, the craft of building, I think, again, is something that's going to perhaps re-emerge and excite people.
Yeah, I think so too. So then, as it stands, so you being the assistant head of the School of Westminster School of Architecture, being very clear about that, where do you see the direction moving forward? How are you guys sort of trying to navigate this in real time?
Our first task, what we're doing is we have a transition period where we move our part 2, that's our postgraduate architecture course, and our part 3, which is our professional practice in architecture course, to meet the new competency standards of the ARB. So we're moving those to meet the new requirements.
Of course.
And so that we're in a position to get people onto those. We're having conversations about more broadly where we think architecture is going, what we want to do with our undergraduate courses as well. I mean, it's not just undergraduate architecture, BA architecture, BSc architecture, environmental design. It's also interior architecture, architecture technology, which are our other 2 main undergraduate courses, and a BA urban planning and design is the third one that's not validated, because they all are relevant. And what we do there has to integrate, because if we're saying, well, in the new world of the ARB world of education, our part 2, our postgraduate MArch course as it is, can take
It's 1 o'clock.
some people who've done interior architecture from our undergraduates, say, or BA urban planning and design into its.
Right, okay.
We're saying then what we've got to do is get them to a position where it's possible for those students, once they've completed
The undergrad.
the MArch or the Masters, can meet the ARB competency outcomes. And actually, we all have to recognise that a number of those competencies, in part, are going to be taught at the undergraduate level, regardless of whether the ARB recognises, formally accredits that or not. And so they have to be, because you cannot, I don't think, meet those competency requirements without the students coming onto the postgraduate course having achieved a certain level of proficiency in them. They may not have fully met them, but they will have got a long way down the line. And that is what happens at the moment. So in a sense, even though the ARB isn't going to be accrediting the undergraduate BA architecture courses in the country, you can see many postgraduate courses when they're interviewing students saying, actually, yes, we think because you've done the RIBA validated course, you will have met enough of the
to be able to get on,
to be able to kind of withstand being able to meet these
ARB requirements.
ARB competency outcomes.
Yeah.
And this is, you can see this happening. Again, we need to see how this plays out. But what I think we want to do is to make sure that our undergraduate courses can feed in various ways. As I say, the RIBA still has to work out what it means in terms of RIBA membership. If someone hasn't done a validated undergraduate course of the RIBA, and we're not looking to, at the moment, validate any more of our undergraduate courses with the RIBA. That may change, but we're not looking to particularly.
And something that I wanted to ask, this is almost like the framework of education, but for instance, validating in this day and time, if a new university or a new school wanted to develop itself, what would they need to do to get validated? Because I feel like it's an age-old process.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the RIBA, and indeed if we're talking about accreditation with the ARB, they have a set of standards, validation standards that they've set out very clearly with a sort of curriculum that students have to be able to, with standard students have to be able to meet. And you essentially have to develop your courses around to meet those criteria or outcomes, and then demonstrate to whichever professional body you're asking accreditation from. And we have our BA undergraduate urban planning and design courses as RTPI accredited. AT, architectural technology rather, is accredited by CIAT, the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technology. So they all have their own validation procedures.
Right.
So you need to meet those. And they come in and look at what you're doing, get others to external advisors, examiners or external advisors to sort of look at whether what you're doing is up to the standard of courses nationally across the board and so on and so forth. And then they will validate it, and they then have a process of periodically revalidating. It varies from institute to institute. With the RIBA, it's every 5 years you do a revalidation where they come in and look at what you've been doing over the next 5 years, and over the last 5 years rather, and also whether you're going to change or whether you're proposing to make any changes. And sometimes, we do make changes every couple of years or so to parts of the course as things change. And so so if we pass the Bill of Health, the RIBA or whichever professional body again you're looking at will revalidate or continue the validation. Okay. So it's a sort of rolling process.
Okay. So you don't, I guess my question is it a chicken or an egg? Because would you need to have an established university?
No, you don't have to. I mean, the RIBA has its own, it has its own courses. It's validated. It's the London School of Architecture has, I think it has an award, I might be wrong here, it has an award. So it's related to a university because Liverpool, is it? Where it's got degree awarding status. So if you want a degree, you were to award a degree as such, yes, there would be a university involved somewhere. But technically, I don't suppose it has to be.
Okay. Well, I guess it's just all down to validation.
So it is all down to validation.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, the ARB wants to see lots of different ways for this. They're trying to encourage lots of different ways that this can happen. And whether or not it will get the diversity it's seeking through this proposal, I don't know. I think, again, that has to come out of the wash, because actually to set up a course is a big thing. It's a big investment. And you've got a number of new courses, architecture degree courses have been set up. I think think Roehampton is setting up one. The University of York has been doing so. It has, and so these things are being set up.
Okay. So I guess the curriculum is just going to have to somewhat adjust and work with the changing industry to just have some sort of amalgamation, because obviously it's a consistent changing landscape.
Well, it is. I mean, I suppose the big question is for us as a school is being able to keep ahead, actually, I think, of the changes in the context. But the challenge is whether the degree award, whether the validating professional bodies are keeping up as well. You kind of have this sort of, industry can be in one position, education can be in another position, and perhaps a professional body is in a third position. And sometimes it's just making sure that there's enough of an overlap that you can actually keep up with the game.
Right.
And it's been forever thus. I mean, we don't have architectural apprenticeships here, and whether we're going to look at that again is to be discussed. I think we have at the moment a town planning level 7, what's called a level 7, that's a postgraduate apprenticeship, but of course that's going by the wayside because government isn't going to be funding that. But the problem with apprenticeships has been a bit over the years. The problem with, I suppose, not apprenticeships per se, but government policy, education provision, industry demand, and this has been a global issue. You see this pattern globally has been out of sync, and there's always been a challenge to kind of get the three things in sync. And different countries have had different ways of trying to adapt to this challenge, with their different kind of apprenticeship type approaches. And obviously we developed our apprenticeship in the UK, but part of it was to sort of try and get a closer alignment between these three different things, because they end up being out of step. Industry is moving ahead, and it's demanding something. Government policy is way behind, and universities or education, not just university schools as well, can be sort of relying heavily on government policy to be able to do certain things, and therefore not be able to respond. So, there's been this sort of dilemma. And I suppose there always will be some sort of lag, actually, in education.
I'm actually really glad you've explained it, because I don't think as architectural students or people coming into architecture in the early years actually understand how all these moving parts sort of affect and somewhat dictate the kind of architectural education you get versus the architectural experience you get in practice. I met a young lady that she had been given the opportunity to start working on stage 4 projects at Part 1, which has now made her like a technical BIM mini genius. But how many students get to work into, have your academic experience and then your portfolio matches what the firm wants for the firm to then say, okay, let's put this person on technical BIM experience, knowing that the longevity of that in the long run really benefits the student, as opposed to, okay, well, we've got Part 1 coming in, what we're going to have her do? Okay, Photoshop.
Well, yes. So, it's that's right. I mean, and of course, practice businesses have a perspective which is about kind of staying afloat. And we know how pressured practices are, and therefore, how much they can remunerate their staff. At the same time, there is, as I say, this sort of massive change, and you're sort of, on one hand, you're relying on government policy to enable certain things to happen. And we can see the debate about planning applications and house building and new towns now in the UK, and there's the extent to which environmental lobby groups can or cannot object to a planning application. There seems to be argument now around that, and whether industry is going to be able to keep up with these changes. Do we have the wherewithal, the capacity within the industry to suddenly build all these houses? It's not down to bricklayers, because if bricklayers are the problem, don't use bricks. It's as simple as that, really. And so, and us, again, it's sort of how we as educators meet this sort of changing demand. I mean, there's a sort of just suddenly thought of something, actually, perhaps to end on. I don't know whether you've had a look at this. I think it's Netflix. There's been this series called A Three-Body Problem.
The Three-Body Problem. I think I've scrolled past it.
It's worth a whirl. It's actually great fun, I think. Because actually, in fact, read the book before you watch the series.
Okay.
Because it's a book written by a Chinese author, Liu, I think he is. It's been translated very well into English. And basically, I'm not going to go into what the film's about, because it's kind of, in some ways, it's a bit weird. And if you like sci-fi, you like
I love sci-fi.
But basically, the three-body problem is a problem apparently in astrophysics.
Right.
Where if you have three celestial bodies, you can never predict what each
body is going to do
when they're in close orbit together,
because of their elliptical orbit.
Whereas you can, it's slightly, whereas you can predict the two bodies. But if you've got three of them, apparently you can't. I don't know that. I'm not a physicist. I'm not an expert. But I was just sort of thinking, well, do you know what? We've got the three-body problem, haven't we? We've got industry, government, education. And
how do you get all of them to work
anyway,
in alignment?
I'll leave you all with that thought.
This is going to be a very interesting future to look forward to. I definitely look forward to working with you and Pam on the future of the architect and setting up these scenario workshops where we can develop it and maybe actually get to a point where we actually present the different scenarios that we've put together. And then equally, I would like to have you back on the show at a later date.
Well, if your viewing figures don't drop through the floor as a result of me being here, I'd love to.
No,
it's quite likely you'll suddenly find that they will.
No, but these are the things, the fourth body problem. Well, that's the thing. You can't have architecture without understanding the framework and the constructs that you're working in.
It's fascinating.
And these things genuinely fascinate me. I mean, we were talking earlier, the journalistic approach of doing interviews and working with understanding people's experiences versus what you want to show the world is a very interesting dynamic that I very much enjoy. So
good.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Okay, well, whenever.
Good. Well, like I like to say, take what you need and leave what you don't, and definitely look out for more episodes with us talking with Alastair